I don't really want to hear a little bit about myself. I've worked at the Peace Studies Department at Bradford for 30 years, most of my career, and I work mainly on international security and causes of violence and changing causes of violence. But I work particularly over the last 10 years on what has happened since 9/11. That's probably the thing to talk about tonight. Now, I've just entered the 10th year of the war in Afghanistan. It's the longest war that the Americans have ever fought, and it doesn't show any sign of diminishing even now. In Iraq, there are still several hundred civilians being killed every month. It's off the front pages of the newspapers. That continues. So we've had 7 years of conflict there. And really I want to go back and try and pose some answers to the question, why has it turned out that way? Because it's worth going back and thinking what was expected after 9/11, when the United States decided to terminate the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. They were very confident that would happen very quickly, that the Al-Qaeda movement would be dispersed, most of its leaders killed, and Afghanistan would make a very rapid transition to a pro-Western state with a couple of big Western military bases at Bagram and Kandahar, and essentially it would almost rewrite the security of Central Asia, and in a sense it would have a real long-term impact for the United States. And in Iraq, people now say, well, there was no post-war planning, that's why it went wrong. That's not true at all. You go back to the immediate aftermath of the termination of the Saddam Hussein regime and see what the people in the Coalition Provisional Authority were saying, people like Paul Bremer and the rest. They had a very clear expectation. Iraq was actually going to very quickly make a transition to a pro-Western state with the ultimate in free economies. It's going to be a completely free market. It would almost be a kind of experiment of the sort you couldn't do in Western Europe or the United States because of annoying hindrances like trade unions and civil society. And Iraq would transition to a free market economy with virtually no financial regulation, complete privatization of all state assets, and even a flat rate tax system. And that was confidently expected. It would also have 3 or 4 very large bases, and the end result there would be that in one way, the real problem state in the Middle East, Iran, would be constrained. You would have bases in Afghanistan to the east, you would have Iraq very much under Western, let's put it politely, supervision, and you would have the Fifth Fleet essentially in control of the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. And it was a visceral blow what happened, and I think we need to just remember the actual sequence. People say that 9/11 was as bad as Pearl Harbor. That's underestimating it. When the first plane hit the North Tower, just before 9 o'clock that Tuesday morning, the immediate reaction was this was an appalling, catastrophic accident. People in and around New York, older people, remember that in 1945 a light bomber had hit the Empire State Building on a foggy night. Not many people in the building, the crew were killed, the building survived, it was an accident. And so when you had the television cameras very quickly played on the burning North Tower and being shown right across the state, sort of sea to sea, essentially that was the belief until just a very few minutes later the second plane hit the South Tower. Then it was America under attack. The South Tower actually collapsed first because it's more seriously damaged, and then the North Tower. And by that time, probably the majority of all the people in the United States were glued to their televisions. Remember, this is heading towards 10 o'clock Eastern Time, right back towards, 7 o'clock Pacific Time, right across the time zones. Pearl Harbor was an attack by a state that was already in a high state of tension with the US against a distant military base in Hawaii by a military force in the pre-television age. And I think in many ways the 9/11 attack had a much greater impact. And inevitably, almost inevitably, the reaction from the Bush administration was, we go on the offensive. There has to be a war on terror. It didn't have to be that way. There were some people arguing at the time, a few people in Europe and some in the United States, that in fact to create a war on terror was probably exactly what the proponents wanted. And what it should have been was an appalling act of transnational criminality, to use every kind of legal means to bring those behind the attacks to justice. I'm very glad that I argued that at the time in writing, that it wasn't just talking to people, and you can look back now and say, look, there was an alternative.